Hey, welcome to Downshift. My name is Matt. This thing's name is the Dodge Hornet, and a lot of you will remember that last week we were in the Alfa Romeo Tonale, and that car and this car are incredibly similar. So we want to know is this Dodge Hornet a budget Alfa Romeo? Today we're hitting the highlights, the best and the rest, starting with the rest. And the first thing we're going to talk about is specifically the fit and finish. Because the design here is very Alfa Romeo and the features are luxury tier. But you put your hands on the center console here and it shakes around and it creaks. The plastics are cheaper, everything feels cheaper. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense for it being the Dodge, but then I have to think about the Mazda CX-30 and the Honda HR-V, and they have great feeling interior builds. It's just a little surprising because visually it's almost identical to the Alfa we were in last week, but I do remember the Alfa feeling a lot better built. Again, makes sense, but just something to note. And then another thing which is gonna make sense, but the fuel economy is not amazing. The Hornet has the most performance here in the segment, bar maybe the Mazda depending on spec, so of course it's gonna be less efficient. But in the interest of being thorough, we have to mention it. 21 mpg in the city and 29 in the highway. Not horrific, but not brilliant either. Although with that being said, I don't know that I've ever met a Dodge person that's really cared about fuel economy. And then we're going to talk about price. Again, due to the performance and a lot of the amenities that we'll talk about later, this makes sense, but the Hornet is at the higher end of the segment in terms of price. This is kind of about level with the Mazda CX-30, at least in turbo form, with starting MSRP of about 35 grand. But here in this one, as tested, we're at $41,000, and the interior is not what it is, or it would be in the Mazda. But we also do get things like cooled seats, so it's hard to totally compare apples to apples. And then there's just a handful of things that aren't perfect, but they're not that bad. They're not deal breakers. They don't deserve their own point on the negative side of the video. But in the interest of being thorough, we do want to mention it. The first is kind of a driving characteristic that I notice most in slower speed conditions around parking lots and those sort of things, but when you take your foot off the throttle, it seems like the car continues to buck or maybe, just increase in acceleration. And I don't know if this has to do with the turbo spooling or maybe the gearbox, but it does give a sense of uncomfortability due to the fact that you're accelerating when you want to be braking and there's people around you. Also, the ride is kind of firm and kind of harsh, but this is the more sporty oriented offering in the segment. And your 360 camera, the shutter speed is a little bit off, so it seems a little like jumpy or glitchy. Your turn signal doesn't stay, which is something we complained about in the Alfa and we complained about in the GR86, so this isn't unique to this car, but just a mild annoyance. And this one is a little bit more annoying. This doesn't have shift paddles, and this is supposed to be the most sporty offering in the segment. But with that covered, let's talk about all the places that this Hornet shines. The first place is the face. I think this thing actually looks pretty good. It's got its own unique front face from the Alfa. You still get sharp LEDs and it's a very Dodge looking grille. You got functional hood scoops, which you can stick your little finger through. So they're not huge, but they are functional. And the paint is Blue Bayou. It's pretty much the same as Misano Blue, but it's got a little bit less flake in it, it seems. And the wheels are an upgrade. They're part of the blacktop package and they look pretty good. The Hornet on the front fender is very sexy, at least if you ask the Throttle House guys. And the profile is exactly the same shape as the Alfa. And then as you get around to the rear, you get a full width tail bar with the Dodge logo in the middle. But weirdly, again, the sportiest offering in the segment, no exhaust ports. You gotta go up to the RT to get the dual exhaust, so bummer. This Hornet's pretty fun to drive. It's supposed to be the sporty version or the sporty offering in the segment, in a segment that's mostly concerned with fuel economy and being affordable, and it achieves that. The GTs don't get the adaptive suspension that you would get in the RTs, but you do get a nice firm and stable ride that stays level in a corner. There's a bit of understeer at corner entry that kind of reminds you that this is a front wheel drive first chassis, but it's fun to whip around. I do miss the paddle shifters if I'm being honest, but the 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder makes 268 horsepower, 295 pound-feet of torque, which is pretty good. It's more horsepower but less torque than the CX-30, but the sound doesn't do much for me, to be honest. But overall, you get the feeling that this thing wants to be driven hard. Ooh. Then there's the size and the use of space. Now this thing was designed pretty obviously as Alfa first, and Alfa seemingly benchmarked their own Stelvio. But here's the thing, the Tonale and the Hornet here are 6 inches shorter than the Stelvio and 2 inches narrower than the Stelvio. Yet you get more rear seat space and more trunk space, even with the plug-in hybrid RT version. The biggest change comes with 5 more inches of rear passenger space. And the trunk space itself is pretty good for this segment. It's more than a Corolla Cross and a CX-30, so it's pretty practical here. And I know we talked about the fit and finish a little bit earlier, and that's very Dodge, but I want to talk about the design itself because it's basically a copy and paste of the Alfa Romeo interior. The only differences that I can really see are the fact that the start button and the drive modes have switched places from the steering wheel and under your climate buttons. You no longer have the massive Alfa shift paddles. You don't have any shift paddles at all, which is a bit of a bummer. And your headrests are now embossed with the Dodge logo rather than the Alfa, obviously. And you no longer have a rubber logo embossed into your wireless charger. But that's really about it. I mean, even the VIN sticker on your driver door jamb here says Made in Italy. And this thing also inherits a bunch of luxuries from the Alfa, and they're luxury tier amenities like heated and cooled seats, a heated steering wheel, all of the windows being auto up-down, you get a power tailgate, and you get the big fancy screens here as standard. So that's pretty good. And then finally, I want to talk about the hallmark of any compact SUV, the tech suite. Here you get the latest version of Uconnect 5, and it looks great. It can be a little slow and laggy depending on what page or menu you're going into, but you get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You even get performance pages that'll track your turbo spool pressure, interestingly in Newton meters. And you've got Alexa built in, you've got over-the-air updates, and you've got a totally digital instrument cluster that's pretty Audi and pretty great. Your 360 camera is decent, but again, we talked about that shutter speed feeling a little bit off, but ultimately it works pretty well. And we mentioned the wireless charger earlier, but it works well. The only annoyance is that it flashes a notification anytime you put the phone in there, so that's just, again, a small annoyance. But your safety suite and autopilot is pretty good. It's not going to lane change for you or let you drive hands-free, but it is good. And it is, again, strange it's lacking paddles and a head-up display. But we've been talking all video about how this is the sportiest offering in the segment, so I think it's time for a drive. Sport mode! There we go. Oh! It is kind of sporty. Okay, yeah, this is supposed to be the sportiest version, or the sportiest offering in the segment. This and kind of the Mazda CX-30 Turbo. This does 268 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. You will get more power and performance from the plug-in hybrid, but then you're adding weight and complexity, and I know some people are averse to that. So what you have here does end up being pretty sporty. I mean, you could hear some tires getting loose over there. You're not going to get that from your Corolla Cross. You're not going to get that from your HR-V. You're not going to get that from your Kona. I know that they make an N-line version of that. You're not going to get it from your Niro. So, yeah, this and the Mazda are kind of the sportiest offerings that you can get. Now, this being the 2-liter, I do kind of like the 2.5 turbo that you get in the Mazda. You get a little bit more torque. You get about 320, I believe, pound-feet of torque versus the 295 that you get here. And then you get a little bit more horsepower here at 268 versus the 250 from the Mazda. The biggest difference, I think, is that this feels a lot bigger on the inside than the Mazda. But of course, you get some less stellar build material and fit and finish. So it's kind of really what it comes down to, what you value. Do you want more space and, you know, a less nice interior, or do you want the Mazda interior with a little bit of the Mazda trade-off being, you know, smaller? But from a driving perspective, I like this thing. It does a weird thing at slower speeds sometimes, and when you're trying to like be, you know, very controlled and maybe keep up with like slow moving traffic or whatever. But when you take your foot off the throttle, especially when you're in boost, the car will continue to lurch forward and like gain momentum, accelerate, even if you've taken your foot off the throttle, which is a very unsettling feeling. It doesn't do it forever, but it just feels a little strange, especially at like parking lot speeds when people are around you. So that feels a little bit unsafe, but other than that, it drives pretty well. There's a little bit of corner entry understeer, but you get on throttle, corner exit, and turbo kicks in. It's not bad. You know, the thing that I do miss, honestly, and the biggest thing is no paddle shifters. We were in the Alfa Tonale last week, had the big metallic paddle shifters, super satisfying to click. No paddle shifters here. This is supposed to be the sportiest offering and there's no paddles. So that's a little bit annoying, but as far as the performance goes, it's pretty good. This does not have the adaptive dampers that you'll get in the RT, the plug-in hybrid version, but you know, the ride ends up being a little bit stiff, but it's pretty decent when you want to do sporty type things. So again, you're making some concessions here in the name of sport. So make sure if you're looking at this thing, you do want the sporty one. You're going to get less fuel economy. You're going to get, you know, a harsher ride, but it will be better as we go over those train tracks. It will be better at the sporty thing. So I think with that, I'll leave you with one more pull. And here we are. Torque steer. Come into this corner, brakes, corner entry, a little bit of understeer, rolling on power, pushes a little bit. It is a front wheel drive chassis. And that's basically all you need to know. Let's do the final thoughts. So that is the best and the rest of the Dodge Hornet. And in a lot of ways, it is a very budget Alfa Romeo Tonale. And in other ways, it's very true Dodge. Now, personally, I think I'd like to have a go in the plug-in hybrid RT version of this Hornet to get a true comparison spec for spec to the Alfa, but I also would like to have a go in that car because it's more the true full power and performance oriented version of this car, and I think that's probably where it shines the most. But either way, it's nice to have another sporty option in an otherwise pretty hybrid and fuel efficient focused segment. Thanks again to Dodge for letting us have a go, and we'll see you in the next one.